Today is November 11th. It is currently 3:30 in the morning. Some of you guys were yapping at me at Sub-Zero Arcs chat today, like, hey Kai, where the fuck is the daily video? What's going on, man? Hey, like, you're slacking off. What's going on? Buddy. All right, listen, we're not a full-time content creator yet, all right? I worked a 12-hour shift today. I got home 4 hours ago. All right, and your boy has stayed up 4 hours trying to get the video out. And okay, so I'm just teasing you guys, but like, I'm late again. And listen, I'm gonna be smart. I'm gonna plan this a bit better. If I know I gotta work 12 hours today, I will just schedule the video and record ahead of time. So that was my fault. But anyways, that is why we're a bit late today. And you know, because it's so fucking late, I am talking a bit quieter because you know I got a roommate. Gotta be considerate of the boy. But anyways, let's talk about today's video. Today we are talking about the 8-bit vertical tree, specifically what to do when you're playing around specific 8-bit headliners. In this vertical tree, for those of you who are unaware at all, real quick, we'll just quickly go over them. We have Riven, Garen, Corki, Caitlyn, a very small vertical in terms of unit quantity. We do have Riven, who is an 8-bit edgelord, Garen, who is an 8-bit Sentinel, 8-bit Corki is a big shot, and 8-bit Caitlyn, who is a rapid fire. So even though it's a very small vertical, we actually have some pretty cool units. Arcade Riven is also like one of my favorite skins in League of Legends, actually back when I used to play a lot. So I have a very big soft spot for this vertical tree. For those of you who don't know, for 8-bit champions, they just gain extra AD and they begin to keep scoring of your team's damage dealt. And you'll see a little arcade booth that pops up on the right hand side. And basically, as you deal more damage, that arcade booth will keep pumping up more numbers. Basically, you will hit certain thresholds, high scores, which you can see on the left hand side. If you hover over your 8-bit trait, you'll see like how much high scores you've hit so far. And every time you hit a high score, you get to deal bonus extra damage. So that is the very quick rundown of this 8-bit board. So let's first talk about our first 8-bit headliner, Corki. Now, Corki, who has big shot, and Corki, who has 8-bit, there is sort of definitely a bias in my opinion when it comes to playing around the Corki headliner. I definitely think that comparing big shot to 8-bit, 8-bit is just probably better overall, and let me just explain that in a little bit. So here, this is, for example, this is the Corki with the big shot headliner, the +2, and as you can already see, there is a bit of a problem here. First off, let's just talk about the composition. We do have Cassante 3 and Corki 3, but in terms of damage dealers, we only have Corki 3. And in general, you really do want to have at least like a secondary carry of some degree, just because especially if you find other damage items, you don't want to be slamming them on like a tank frontliner, right? Like, that doesn't really make any sense. So the ideal scenario is that you have a secondary carry who can help support your team with a little bit of extra DPS, especially when you have such a front and tanky ass frontline such as this, with especially the Cassante 3, which Cassante 3, by the way, surprised me quite a bit. I was testing this out today, and it was surprisingly taking a lot more than I had expected. So now your frontline is definitely solid, at least with the current numbers. So I definitely don't think that you need more Sentinel. If anything, you need more damage. So that's where the Corki 8-bit really comes into play, because first off, when you have the Corki 8-bit, it's very easy to just hit 4 8-bit and then just get even more damage every time you hit a new high score. On top of that, you just get to play the Kaisa as well, who can hold extra damage items in case you need it. And it's just overall a very solid board, very easy to tempo with once you've hit everything. In terms of itemizing our Corki as well with damage, in general, just any AD items are great. I don't think Deathblade is that great on him, to be honest, though. But IE, GS, Guardbreaker, you'll see Guardbreaker pop up quite a bit actually throughout the video. In general, right now, I think Sona is sort of one of the bigger outliers in the current meta, where the shields she provides is just too great. And there's actually a bunch of shielding in the current set, with stuff like Guardians, stuff like Sona, etc. So Guardbreaker is just going to probably want to be the meta items that you'll almost always slam no matter what, and it's almost never a bad slam because it just counteracts the meta in just so many ways. So you'll see Guardbreaker popping up quite a bit, and IE as well, just a really great damage amplification item for things like your Caitlyn ultis, your Corki ultis, etc. So you're gonna see a lot of IE Guardbreaker combinations, especially because they work so well in conjunction with one another, both giving each other crit. So that's why you'll see this a lot. Anyways, the idea is very simple. Cassante, by the way, I think solo frontlining him is actually acceptable. Gargoyles is really nice, Redemption is really nice. Just generic tank items, anything of the sort is super nice. You just want 3 tank items. I did think about trying to make Cassante a carry, because for whatever reason he has like 700% AD scaling on his ability, and it can actually pack quite a punch. You'd be kind of surprised, but I couldn't really make a way that would, you know, consistently make him a carry. But I mean, maybe there is some dark hidden damage Cassante carry tech somewhere. I highly doubt it, but if you find it, let me know. I would love to hear about it. But the board is very simple to cap out. You just keep playing in 8-bit, you just keep those stacks going, but instead you just cap out with the 4 sentinels instead. Blitzcrank is just a very solid frontline. Again, one of the 4 cost premier tanks of the set. I think I said the word carry, sorry, he's a tank. Tanks of the set. You do have to kind of play a shitter though, like Mordekaiser, to just make sure that you get the 4 sentinel going. But on top of that, you just play 4 senti, 4 8-bit, and 2 big shot to rapid fire. It's very easy to cap out with this board. Clearly, we do have a Kaisa and a Sentinel on our board, but if you know anything about the current set, rapid fire, big shot, you thought of it, you knew it. It's just Jhin and Lucian with just, you know, easiest way to cap out your board. It's a very simple, very straightforward way to play the game, but super fun board, has a lot of potential. I definitely think this is a very top 4able board. I think it's a very like top 3 in my opinion. Once you start playing, I think this is the problem with this board though, is that once you start playing into higher elo and more competitive lobbies, is that you're gonna start getting punished pretty heavily in the late game if you are not playing very flexibly. And the thing about one cost reroll is that one cost reroll is very rigid. As you'll actually see, not only just this video, but in any video we're gonna start talking about in the future from now on, where we're talking about like 4 cost and 5 cost carries within like certain verticals. We're gonna start to really think about not boards but clusters, and we'll touch upon that later. Actually, I think it's a conversation that we should stick for later. But anyways, that's basically my thoughts on this Corki reroll board. Again, it's a very top 3able board, but anything past that, I think you are sort of shooting for the stars, especially the higher you climb. Moving on, Garen with Sentinel for the fucking headliner. Listen, man, I'm gonna be honest. Garen kind of reminds me of Vi and Moshers, where I just don't really ever see a reason to ever play around Garen and ever make him your headliner and your carry or your main tank or your main headliner or whatever. I just could not find a line that makes sense. The closest thing I could find was Garen 3, and then even if you play Garen 3, it's because you're playing like Garen Kale reroll with like 4 senti frontline. And even then, I'm gonna be honest, I don't even know if this board is any good or not. The idea is that like you can just basically, like, there's 2 versions of this board, right? This is basically like what you're playing until you find the 4 cost, and then once you find the 4 cost, the Yone, I believe, becomes the Viego, and then that's just kind of how the board comes about again. And then oh, so yeah, Echo becomes Blitzcrank, right? But again, this board is just like, I would, if I had to take an honest guess, I would assume this board is very mid. Maybe Kale's overtuned or something, so maybe it's actually good for whatever reason. I heavily doubt it though, to be completely honest. In terms of like capping out the board, I don't also really know what you would go. Maybe you increase the pentakills. I mean, realistically, you'd probably increase the edgelords with this sort of concept, but again, this is not really a Garen board by any means, so this is not really a topic of discussion for today. But I mean, hey, if you want to just try it out, feel free. But again, Garen just doesn't really make any sense. In terms of playing around Garen, in terms of an 8-bit headliner, again, it's only something that you would use to just like you're like, oh, like I'm just waiting for Caitlyn headliner waiting room, like Caitlyn like 8-bit headliner waiting room, or Caitlyn like rapid fire waiting room. Like, you're just using him to just keep stacking up 8-bit. Like, that's the only reason you would ever use him as a headliner. So again, no comps comes to mind, but if you have one that's really cool or really interesting with Garen, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear it. So the next one we want to talk about is Riven, the 3 cost of 8-bit. Now, I think this board is really interesting. This is a 4 crowd diver board with Riven and Yone dual carry. I would argue though that this board is probably more of a Yone carry board, but Riven is a very strong secondary carry that you can play within this board. This board is really interesting. I don't see a lot of crowd diver boards really popping off, and today was the first time I'd ever seen a crowd diver board do well. I was actually watching Sub-Zero Arc's stream, like I mentioned earlier, and somebody in his lobby, Becca, not Becca Tilts, a different Becca, but if you come by my stream, you know who she is. But she actually played this very interesting Yone 3 line, and I think she was still trying to figure out the line herself, so she wasn't actually 100% sure as to how it worked. But their board had Yone 3 but no Riven 3, but I think that if you refine the line a bit, I think you can actually dual carry with both of these and actually have some pretty interesting results. You can also see here, by the way, there is a Kiana on this board to cap out with. This Kiana doesn't actually have to be on this board on 7 for obvious reasons. It's very difficult to find a Kiana on 7. It's just evident until you find Kiana. Very simple enough. But I think this is really interesting because it kind of opens the possibility of potentially playing Kiana as your tertiary carry, which I know, like, playing around Kiana in general is something that a lot of people have been struggling with, myself included, in terms of just trying to find a board that makes sense with Kiana. But seeing this board in action today, I was quite honestly very impressed at how strong the board had looked. So this is definitely something that you can consider. Obviously, instead of playing around the Riven headliner, you can obviously play around the Yone headliner. Both of them have pretty... Is it a motorcycle? It's like 4 in the morning. I think it's a moped. But going back to what I was saying before, Yone, his headliner effect, and Riven's headliner effects, they're both just extra stats. There's nothing that is like really substantial about their headliner effect. So regardless of whoever one you hit, I think both are fine. I think regardless, if you find one or the other, you can say, hey, this is a potential opportunity to maybe play around Riven Yone dual carry reroll. Again, a very interesting board, and this is with the 8-bit headliner, by the way. Real quick, just gonna talk about this. 8-bit, it's sort of just like extra bonus stats for free. It's not really there to be like, oh, like this is good or this is bad. I don't really know if you want to play around the edgelord version in terms of the headliner effect instead, but regardless, I think both are fine. Both have their own merits. 8-bit just gives you a bit of extra bonus damage. You don't really get to stack it too much because Riven's the only one autoing for obvious reasons. But you can also play around the edgelord version here, which is, again, it's basically the exact same board. It's very, very like minuscule in terms of differences. Only difference here is that this is 4 crowd diver, 3 edgelord with like a couple extra different stats with like EDM because you get to copy the Zac or the Zed depending on what you find. And then here you have 5 edgelord instead, right? You just plus 2 edgelord. If I do have to guess though, I would say that this version is, I did say before that it probably doesn't matter, but now that I'm thinking about it, 5 edgelord is probably a bit stronger for obvious reasons, because you're just a little bit deeper into the vertical tree that is helping buff Riven. I mean, that probably has to be it. But maybe the 8-bit stacking is good. I don't know. Again, please test it out. Let me know what you think if you happen to try this line out. I think it's very interesting, and I think it's something that not a lot of people are playing, so I definitely want to see more people trying it out. Obviously, you do see the Viego here, which can look a little daunting to find on 7, but again, this Viego doesn't have to be a Viego. It can just be a Kale until you find the Viego and you are being chilling. Again, same thing with the Kiana, Evelyn, over instead. You get the idea. Finally, let's talk about the last unit within the 8-bit vertical, Caitlyn. Now, like I had briefly mentioned before, when we start talking about 4 costs and 5 costs, especially in very flexible sets, we need to start thinking about these kinds of units within clusters. Now, unless you've been a very long time viewer of mine, I mean like a long time, I mean I'm talking like set 8, is sort of the first time I recall ever really mentioning the term clusters. Also, I don't really know if anybody else really uses this term, and I don't recall anybody using it before me, so I don't know, maybe I coined it. But clusters is basically a term that I believe I created, which talks about groups of 3, 4, or 5 units. It's basically a board within a board. These 3, 4, 5 units work so well in conjunction with one another that you can either pair one cluster with another cluster, or you can think of it as, okay, I have this cluster of units, and then I can just put in some flex units around it and try to build a board like that. They're just 2 main approaches. For the Caitlyn unit in particular, we have two different clusters we want to really think about. The first one is the rapid fire cluster. This is the cluster you think about whenever you have +2 with Caitlyn, and you simply play with Garen and Blitzcrank. It's very obvious. It just works very, very well in a lot of boards, very easy to flex into. Some people might argue that like, hey, like Caitlyn doesn't feel that good if you don't have a lot of 8-bit stacking from the early game. Caitlyn, especially in the late game, is able to stack up those 8-bit high scores fairly quickly. So it's really not that bad, in my honest opinion. I think it'll feel a bit weak for like maybe a round or 2, but then she'll quickly catch up. It does not take very long because she's able to dish out so much damage so quickly. There's a bunch of different ways that you can build a board around this. For example, just flexing any strong units that you can find, maybe like the Jhin, for example, as a secondary carry. Then you just play into something like Big Shot. Usually it's the Misfortune, and then you can start thinking about Jazz, and you can start thinking about Dazzler, and maybe you need a bit more frontline because that's definitely not enough. You can start thinking about units like Alawi, right? And then if you're playing around the Alawi, then you probably want to think about something like the Zac, right? And suddenly we've already built like a crazy fucking board, right? Very simple way to play horizontally, but this is just one example. And again, a very easy way to play around the Caitlyn rapid fire. Obviously, if you find the, you know, like a chosen Lucian, like obviously you pivot out. But nonetheless, if you're playing around Caitlyn, you're probably playing flexibly. So you're probably, you know, playing this for a while, but are you ending with this? Hopefully not. Hopefully you're ending with a 5 cost. But not only do we have +2 rapid fire for the headliner for Caitlyn, we also need to talk about the +2 for 8-bit. Now, in my opinion, I think the +2 for 8-bit is going to realistically be one of the strongest ways to cap out your board in very high elo competitive lobbies. The reason I say this is because unlike PvE environments where we are sort of playing into a bunch of bots, no flame, but comparing the skill, you know, trying to compare different compositions and ideas and pairing them against, you know, like if I'm like, let's say I'm GM, right? I'm Grandmasters, right? And I'm paired against like a bunch of people, and let's say the average elo or MMR of the lobby is like gold to plat. You're gonna get away with a lot of shit. Like a lot of greeting your economy, a lot of different things, right? And like a lot of times, like we're seeing a bunch of 3-star 5 costs, but the reality is that that's gonna barely happen at all at the higher end of the echelon of the ladder, because people are playing so much higher tempo. They know how to build their boards. They know how to utilize the efficiency of their economy much better than lower elo players, right? So you're going to get punished if you're trying to play these like 3-star 5 costs or like but this 9-5 supremacy unless you like giga high roll, right? So in terms of the reality of like trying to play around endgame boards, typically 2-star 4 costs is sort of the name of the game. 2-star 4 costs, especially when you're playing around flex. And I think out of all of them, this is sort of realistically going to be one of the stronger endgame boards when you're thinking about playing around a 2-star 4 cost carry, specifically Caitlyn. Now 8-bit is really, really great because you just get to, again, you might not have been stacking in the early game, but you get to stack it pretty quickly in the late game. So it alleviates that issue pretty easily, and you get to stack, get a little bonus AD. But on top of that, this is sort of, in my opinion, again, one of the strongest clusters that you can play for your backline damage. This is very simply a Misfortune Jhin Lucian Caitlyn. It works very beautifully, and as you can tell, because our backline is basically solved, now we just flex whatever we find for the front line, right? We can play stuff like the Alawi, like we said before, stuff like Zac, stuff like the Thresh, stuff like, I don't know what else is a really strong Guardian, something like the Yorick, right? And you know, again, we just flex around whatever we find. Maybe we just take in a Sona for fun because Sona is a little busted at the moment. And that's just a very, very simple board to be playing around. I mean, obviously in a perfect world, if the game was perfectly balanced, it would be Ziggs for the, I believe it's Hyper Pop, right? And yeah, you get the idea though. Very strong board, very easy to flex. Again, one of the strongest front lines that you can, or not front lines, sorry, one of the strongest back lines that you can potentially play in the current set, in my opinion. And this is something that I think we'll be seeing a lot at the higher end of the ladder. Obviously, there's a bunch of different forecasts to play around, a bunch of different lines, but I think this will be one of the more common endgame boards that we'll see for, you know, your top 3s, your top 2s, your top 4s. But now that we've spoken about every single one of the headliners that you can play around, I do want to briefly mention the vertical 8-bit board. And when I say vertical, I'm not talking about 4, I'm talking about 6. And I think 6 is actually really strong, like really disgustingly strong. And I think obviously you have to hit the 8-bit emblem, which is very hard to find. It's very hard to find spatulas in the current meta, which is great. It should be hard to find these verticals. But I think if you're given the opportunity to potentially play into 8-bit, especially find the spat early on, I say shoot for it, because I genuinely think that 8-bit is super, super strong because of how much you're able to stack so quickly, and you garner so much tempo that it's very easy to just like top 4 and then maybe go even further than that. There is also a very specific augment with 8-bit called Insert Coin, where currently right now your 8-bit champions execute targets below 10% HP, and the executions have an 8% chance to drop 2 gold. Increased, by the way, by 1% for each high score achieved. And it gives you a Corki and a garen. Do you guys remember when back in early set 9, do you remember the strongest augment? One of the strongest gold augments you get at 2-1? It was Total Domination. It was the Noxus augment that said, hey, your Noxus units, they can now execute the opponents. Insert Coin is like Total Domination on fucking steroids. You not only do get the execute, but the executes also have a chance for the executions to drop extra gold. And then that percentage of potentially dropping the gold is increased every time you get a high score. And then you get a Corki and a Garen. It's beyond busted in my opinion. I actually think Insert Coin is one of those augments that if you see it, it's just an auto take at the current moment, and I really, really hope they like turbo nerf the shit out of it, because I feel like if you take Insert Coin, it's just like a free top 2. It's like disgustingly easy to just like tempo with it, and then you just go fast 9 because of all the gold and the executions, or rather all the gold you get and that you generate from just having like a decent 4 8-bit board. and just like tempoing throughout the lobby. By the way, sorry, I dropped my chopsticks and I lost my train of thought in the middle of my thought. I'm hoping they nerf this augment because I think it's way too strong. But let me know what you think. Let me know if you've played it before. Let me know if you think it's also busted as well, because I personally think it is. But that's basically going to be it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys tomorrow for another daily upload. And until then, I will see you guys all later. Take care and happy climbing.